Welcome to Field 302, Study Session 3, Tools for Philosophical Writing, Introduction. To effectively perform a task, one must have the right tools and use them in the right manner. Research and writing in philosophy is surely not an easy task, and it can become much harder or impossible for the researcher if he is not well equipped for the difficult task. Thus, a work of philosophical writing and research is never complete without examining the tools of accomplishing the task. In this lecture, we shall examine some of the basic tools of any worthwhile philosophical inquiry. They are the principles of logical reasoning and argument, a good mastery of the language of discourse, and a good mastery of the methods of philosophizing. Objective: to understand the role of logic and argument in philosophical inquiry, to examine the importance of language and method in philosophical writing and research. Logic and argument. Logic in this traditional sense is a study of correct inference. It studies formal structures and non-formal relations, which hold together evidence and hypothesis, reasons and belief, or premises and conclusion. It is a study of both conclusive and inconclusive references, or, as it is also commonly described, the study of both entailment and induction. Specifically, logic involves the detailed study of formal systems designed to exhibit such entailments and inductions. More generally, though, it is the study of those conditions under which evidence rightly can be said to justify, entails, imply, support, corroborate, confirm, or falsify a conclusion. Logic is thus the science of reasoning, involved in the business of evaluating arguments by sorting out good ones from bad ones using sound principles or techniques of good reasoning. Arguments, as understood in logic, consist of arguing for a position by means of conclusive or highly probable evidence. Hence, in an argument, there is a conclusion. Some premises provide conclusive and undeniable grounds for accepting the conclusion, and this is referred to as deductive arguments, whereby it will be a contraction to accept the premise and deny the conclusion. In other words, the premises provide only sufficient but not a conclusive or necessary basis for accepting the conclusion, thus making the conclusion only highly probable. In this case, the argument is an inductive one, where one does not fall into a contradiction by accepting the premise and denying the conclusion. The importance of logic as the principles and technique for good reasoning and well-constructed argument for philosophical research and writing is at once obvious. Research and writing in philosophy is all about making sound arguments and analysis, providing good reasoning for holding a position or supporting one, and engaging in a logical and coherent assessment of arguments. Logic, as a science of reasoning, provides the needed training for the philosopher. This is why logic is a core discipline in any philosophy curriculum. That logic is very essential for good reasoning in general accounts for the reason why every student in the tertiary institution is made to be trained at least in the elementary aspect of logical tools and techniques, particularly at the first year of study. This is because the formators of the institution's curricula are well aware that every student needs logic for good reasoning, and assessment of argument in any field of study. Philosophy's case is not exceptional. In fact, philosophy students are privileged to excavate deeper into the rich soil of logic over and over again before graduating. The obvious preferential treatment accorded philosophy students in the study of logic stems from the fact that logic is the philosophy student's most effective tool in carrying out his or her assignment. In fact, logic is ingrained in the study of philosophy and can never be left out of it at any point in time. For example, a student is trained on the laws of thought, namely the law of identity, the law of non-contraction, and the law of excluded middle, and how, where they can be applied. The student is also taught the fallacies that should be avoided when arguing for a position, such as the fallacies of relevance and fallacies of ambiguity. The student is also trained in the techniques and rules of formal logic and how breaking such principles can weaken an argument. For instance, in a syllogistic argument, one of those not in use has a particular term in two senses. The term ruler could mean a ruling tool or a leader of a people. When the term is used in a syllogistic argument, it must be used in just one of the two senses to avoid ambiguity or vagueness. If this rule is broken, the writer commits the fallacy of the multiplication of terms. Consider the following example. A ruler straightens things. David is a ruler. Therefore, David should straighten things. In the argument, the term ruler is used in different senses and can be misleading. This makes the argument unsound. The philosopher is also trained by the use of brain tasking calculations and exercises in formal logic involving the application of valid rules to arguments such as the rules of inference, the rules of replacement, conditional proof rule, and the rule of indirect proof. The application of these rules exercises the brain and makes the student to think faster and sharper about issues. Therefore, the importance of logic and argument in philosophical writing and research cannot be overlooked. Mastery of writing language. We communicate through language. In fact, communication is not possible if the speaker and the hearer or the writer and his or her audience do not understand each other's language of communication. All we have to say, the points we are making, the analysis we do, or the arguments we put forward are only possible through the use of language. Hence, a strong mastery of the language by which we communicate with and which our audience understand is very essential in researching and writing in philosophy. Language is thus an essential tool of philosophy. Olusegun Oladipo identifies two major reasons for this. First is the obvious reason that philosophical ideas and theories are expressed in language, which is why a philosopher ought to have a good mastery of the language he communicates in. When he has such mastery, he or she is able to express himself or herself with clarity and precision of thought and without vagueness and ambiguity of speech, a much desired objective in philosophical writing. This also accounts for the pursuit of meanings in philosophy, which involve the clarity of concepts and terms employed in a philosophical essay to express our ideas and viewpoints. Second, mastery of language places the philosopher in an advantageous position over professionals in other disciplines. The philosopher uses language to sort out human experiences, reveal the connection that exists between things and events, create and construct concepts to represent multiplicity of events and experiences, and generally become more enlightened about the nature of the world and the place of humankind in it. John Stuart Mill is thus compelled to compare the role of language in philosophical inquiry to the role of telescope in astronomical inquiry. He says therefore that Language is evidently, and by the admission of all philosophers, one of the principal instruments or L of thought, and any imperfection in the instrument or in the mode of employing it is confessedly liable. For a mind not previously versed in the meaning and right use of the various kinds of words, to attempt the study of the methods of philosophizing would be as if someone should attempt to become an astronomical observer, having never learned to adjust the focal distance of his optical instrument so as to see distinctly. Methods of philosophizing. In the preceding lecture, we examined the nature of the method of philosophy as distinct from that of science. An attempt will be made here to elaborate on the highlighted methods of philosophy in the preceding lecture. The reason for this is that a writer or researcher in philosophy must be conversant with the various methods of philosophizing. This is because if he or she is familiar with the different methods that will be used in the different essays, it will come across while researching, it will be able to grasp faster the nature of argument in an essay he or she is reading and the direction the argument is headed. He or she can also choose a suitable method when carrying out a particular research. There are a number of methods that have been used by philosophers down the history of philosophy in engaging in philosophical inquiry. They include, but are surely not limited to, the Socratic method, the speculative method, or the method of abstraction, the Cartesian method or method of doubt, the dialectical method, and the phenomenological method. As stated earlier, the Socrates method consists of a number of stages. First, he presents his philosophical views in an everyday conversation, casually mentioning them to his companions and engaging their interest. Second, he will point out a certain philosophical concept that needed to be analyzed. Third, he will profess ignorance and ask his companions his opinion on the matter. When given the other person's answer, Socrates will analyze their definition by asking questions that expose its weaknesses or wrongness. Once again, the person will provide another definition, revised more clearly this time, and again, Socrates will repeat the process of questioning, exposing weakness of revised definition. They continue in this way until the clearest definition of the question is reached. In this manner, Socrates would also cause the other person to realize his own ignorance, which is the first step, according to Socrates, to wisdom. Socrates also employed in this method the use of reduction and absurdum form of argument, which means reducing to an absurdity. He would begin by assuming that his companion's offered definition is true, but then show that it logically implied either an absurdity or a conclusion that contradicts other conclusions previously drawn by his companion. By exposing a false statement from the proposition, he skillfully proved that the assumption rationally must be false. Although sometimes quite frustrating to the ones Socrates conversed with, the method combined with the reduction and absurdum argument proved effective and eye-opening. The speculative method or method of abstraction involves the researcher's ability to explore imagination as vast territory of enchanted possibilities. When philosophers are faced with questions that transcend what sense experience can answer, they tend to speculate within the ambit of reason. To be sure, what may give rise to such questions are always within the realms of experience, but in trying to answer them, philosophers usually apply the method of speculation and abstraction in a logical and rational manner. Plato's speculation about the world of forms and the robust description of such a world as if it were real and tangible is a clear case of abstraction resulting from a philosophical dilemma on why certain things change and others do not, on what could be real as different from what appears to be real. The Cartesian method of philosophy is associated with the philosopher René Descartes. in whose thought the method is pronouncedly used. It is a process of finding solutions to philosophical problems on a presumptuous basis. It involves rejecting anything one may have known about the issue at hand and approaching the issue on a clean slate. Descartes' philosophy was deeply rooted in his desire to ascertain pure and certain knowledge. In order to accomplish this, he felt that he could not rely on what he had been taught or what he thought he knew, as he could not be absolutely assured that this was pure and uncorrupted information. Thus, he set out to formulate clear and rational principles that will be organized into a system of truth from which accurate information could be deduced. The principle that he came up with as a starting point for his philosophy was that of methodic doubt, that is, to doubt everything. Descartes believed that he could not rely on our observations of the world around us, as these perceptions could be deceiving. Consequently, Descartes believed that only those truths which he derived using reasoning, that is, reason and intuition only, were reliable. This method is also referred to as Descartes' methodic doubt. The dialectical method is a method of argument or exposition that systematically weighs contradictory facts or ideas with a view to the resolution of their real or apparent contradiction. In other words, it involves disputation or debate, particularly intended to resolve differences between two views rather than to establish one of them as true. It is thus the process of reconciliation of contradiction, either of beliefs or in historical processes. Socrates also employed the dialectical method. We find it also in the writings of Kant. It is, however, more pronounced in the works of Hegel and Marx. Hegel applied the method in arriving at truth by starting a thesis, developing a contradiction antithesis, and combining and resolving them into a coherent synthesis. It is also seen in the Marxian process of change through the conflict of opposing forces, whereby a given contradiction is characterized by a primary and a secondary aspect. The secondary succumbing to the primary, which is then transformed into an aspect of a new contradiction. The phenomenological method is one of the most prominent philosophical methods of the 20th century, popularized by Edmund Husserl. It aims to describe, understand, and interpret the meaning of experiences of human life. It focuses on research questions such as what it is like to experience a particular situation. Husserl emphasized the centrality of the human context in understanding life. That is, researchers and readers of research can understand human experience because they are participants in the human condition. Thus, the task of understanding is to retain continuity with what is already experientially evident and familiar to us as humans. As a method of inquiry, it is based on the premise that reality consists of objects and events as they are perceived or understood in human consciousness and not of anything independent of human consciousness. The method is not intended to be a collection of particular facts about consciousness, but it rather supposed to furnish us with facts about the essential natures of phenomena and their modes of givenness. Borrowing from Descartes' methodic doubt, the method employs phenomenological reduction in carrying out its research. That is, the bracketing of all we know about a phenomenon and approaching it presuppositionlessly in order for the thing to open itself to our consciousness just as it is. Summary. To effectively research and write in philosophy, it is clear from the above that we must not only be aware of the tools needed for philosophical inquiry, but master these tools. We must master the principles and techniques of good reasoning in order to detect fallacious arguments in the essays we read and while drafting our own essays. We necessarily should be in full control of our language of communication and will be willing to clarify the concept we use in our discourse. It is also essential that we familiarize ourselves with the method of research in philosophy and apply the appropriate method in particular research cases. This is the end of study session 3. Thanks for listening.